Recently, I was listening to a live stream of people who really dislike Sonic Frontiers, because I personally really enjoy the game. I find it interesting to hear people's gripes with the game itself, stuff I agree with, stuff I don't agree with, finding middle grounds. But one of the streamers mentioned that he received a comment on his Sonic Frontiers review for reviewing it as a game first and not just as a Sonic game. And I started thinking about my own review and takes on Sonic Frontiers, and just kind of the franchise in general. Isn't it kinda crazy that when we talk about Sonic games, we always specify that it's a good or bad Sonic game? Not just a good or bad game, a Sonic game. And honestly, I think my personal bias towards Sonic as a franchise really stops me from looking at it objectively. I don't think I could ever really critique a Sonic game fairly, because ultimately, I will always judge a Sonic game on it being a Sonic game. When I say something like, I think Like a Dragon 7 is a good game, I don't just mean for a Like a Dragon game. When I say Final Fantasy 16 is a must-have, I don't just mean a must-have Final Fantasy game. When I say Mario Odyssey is a fun 3D platformer, I don't just mean you get the picture. And with this mindset, I want to try and look back on Sonic Frontiers now that its DLC cycle is done and we presumably won't get any more additional content. Has my opinion of the game changed in the last 12 months? Has the DLC impacted it for better or worse? Was my initial review maybe a little too soon? Alright, no, I can answer that one. Yeah, I should have waited just a bit longer to cement my feelings. Man, can you believe it's been a year already? If you told me 2 years ago I'd be actively excited for a Sonic game to have 3 major updates, I'd call you crazy and then spout something negative about Forces. Don't get me wrong, I still hate Forces, but that's a conversation for a different day. Frontiers really feels like a breath of fresh air in the Sonic community. Something a majority is positive about with reasons that expand past, I like Sonic and it's not too bad, and looking at it from a viewpoint of, is it a good game in general, I still think that, yeah, it is. Does it have issues? Yeah. And they've become even more apparent with the latest updates. Sonic Team, as always, clearly has some problems with platforming harder than the basics when it comes to not having automation in there. But I think that's okay, and I need you to hear me out. The reason I'm so mean to games like Forces and Colors is because I can tell barely any effort was put into a lot of the game. Hallway 3D level design that didn't amount to much more than hold X to win, and 2D platforming that was as basic as any of the new Super Mario Bros. Games. Why do you think no Kishimoto-produced game had levels taken from it and put into the cyber stages? But with Update 3, I can tell that my assumption that Sonic Team was looking at what made previous 3D game stages work in the cyber stages has started bearing some fruit. Yes, the difficulty spike in some of these are stupid, but as somebody who is used to Sonic's playstyle, I don't mind that. When I fell off any of the new towers in the DLC, I never really felt upset. In fact, I felt motivated to try and get back up there. I think all the new platforming challenges in both Update 2 and 3 are showing that Sonic Team is finally, and I mean finally, looking at an issue that has long plagued Sonic games both 2D and 3D, automation, taking control away from the player for extended amounts of time. Don't get me wrong, automation for a set piece is a-okay. The Wheel Chase in Emerald Coast wouldn't work without it, but it's a short set piece that's fun. It's when entire stages are just Sonic running and you only have to press boost or homing attack or the quick step that the issue arises. Or, in cases of DIMS and in specific Sonic 4, speed boosters to get you through fucking everything. Apparently, if you set the game to easy, these platforming sections in Update 3 are automated, and I feel that's a good trade-off. And in that same regard, the 9 new cyber stages added in Update 3 kinda took me by surprise. The amount of freedom you have in most of them is astounding. The Spin Dash added in Update 2 already was a major plus point to Sonic's toolkit and allowed for some stupidly free running around the open world in previous cyber stages. So these brand new ones that were designed with the Spin Dash in mind have some stupidly fun tricks you can pull off. The more automated stages take advantage of the more hallway-esque designs by adding multiple routes that are easily missed and cost you time. Most stages are also much more vertically designed, meaning that if you get good airtime, you can skip some sections, and in 1 or 2 cases, you're also rewarded with secret exits. While they still use the 4 normal tile sets from Frontiers, and these new levels are basically pasted on top of previous stages, if this is what we can expect from Sonic Team going forward, albeit hopefully not with as many cut and copied platforms as if they're made by fans, then I'm very excited for traditional 3D stages in the future. When I say that this new iteration of the spin dash has given us movement that is the closest Sonic has ever gotten to feeling like the CD opening, I genuinely mean that. Sadly, when it comes to the open world, some of the walls and more steep hills that weren't designed to let you run on them do get kind of annoying. A well-timed spin dash on a hill, and you can get some stupidly fast airtime and traverse the islands much faster. But when you go to any lower areas that are designed to be explored via platforming, it's really annoying being unable to launch yourself from the wall into the air, and then Sonic is just stopped dead in his tracks. Nothing feels more dissatisfying than when you're in the flow of movement and you're suddenly stopped dead in your tracks. Running around the island can be so fucking satisfying when you're in the flow of movement, and then when you think something isn't steep enough and you can dash up it, you're suddenly stopped in your tracks and forced to watch Sonic slide down. It is so close to greatness, and we can already see what they're capable of when they don't let themselves be constrained by both visible and invisible walls too much. But as it stands right now, there are times when it feels like they both want you to have open movement, but also play by the rules made up by the developers. It's a thing that needs to be addressed in future games. Either you want players to follow the path you want them to, or you give players the full freedom to do whatever they want. They can't keep having these wide open zones with roadblocks leading to the game. Early game? Sure, it's fine to have a section or two that do need some specific story progression, but when you have all skills unlocked, you should not have to play or be gatekept by slightly too steep walls, or something like a drawn-up bridge where you could very easily just launch yourself towards wherever you need to go, but are then stopped in mid-air by an invisible wall. And speaking of big old difficulty spikes, good fucking god, I really got my ass beat in some of these challenges, and honestly, I couldn't be happier. Like, I get it. Right? Sonic is ultimately a franchise for babies, and Sonic Frontiers is basically babies' first introduction to action combat games. But shit, it feels like they didn't really playtest one or two of these. I mean, 400 rings for 3 bosses where your biggest damage dealer is parries that have been changed into actual action game parry windows. There's a damage spike, and then there's the fucking cliff you're thrown into. Even with Easy On, the fact your stats are reset to 1 and no chance to refresh even a few rings is just absolutely dumb. And the worst part is, I have played a playthrough of Ultimate Difficulty, where even against Titans you insta-die when hit. This really was a crazy difficulty spike, and in my opinion, these challenges need to adapt to difficulty. If you're doing this in Ultimate Difficulty, yeah, stats back to 100, 400 rings with no refresh, and insta-death if you get hit. Easy, however, should just set your stats to like 75 out of 99 with a ring refresh at the start of each fight, and scale down from there as you go higher in difficulties. The other trials, specifically the 4 shielded enemies one, just needs some extra time, and it's absolutely fine. The other 3 were just kind of there, you know, they weren't too hard. And of course, the brand new final boss. And it's better than the original end fight, which wasn't very hard, considering the original was a random shoot 'em up type behind hard mode. And our first new Sonic transformation in a good few years, Super Sonic 2, as named by the in-game files. Though, until any official channels call him Super Sonic 2, he doesn't really have a name yet. The boss fight is a pretty fun challenge of your ability to time your parries, with an attack that capture rings by a good chunk per hit. My biggest gripe is that the very obvious thing stopping you from actually destroying the boss is kind of hard to hit. See, the only way I've found to actually be able to detach the cable from Supreme is by first attacking the head and then quick stepping away. It'll change the target to the cable, but nothing really tells you this, and I guess by this point of the game, they expect you to know how Sonic's kit works, but in this case, we haven't really had a boss or enemy that had a hyper-specific target you needed to hit by quick-stepping. Super Sonic 2 is both cool and a little disappointing. I really like that Sonic doesn't actually say anything. He's completely silent and much more focused on being the enemy. His animations are much more, I'm not playing games anymore, with some heavy inspiration from Ultra Instinct Goku style of no-selling attacks. But I am a little disappointed that his only visual changes are his eyes and aura. I get that Iizuka or whoever at Sega doesn't want Hypersonic back, but still, it could have used a bit more flair. The last new proper transformation was technically Darkspine Sonic. Excalibur Sonic was just a suit of armor, as Kino and soulful as it was. Even the Wisp transformations all give Sonic wacky new bodies. And As much as it might be a hot take, I feel like this is why Supersonic needs to have his middle spikes still be pointed downwards. Any future potential upgrades to the base Supersonic can then be differentiated by having all his spikes point up, making it feel more as if there's been a significant power-up. I mean, we all know Supersonic was and always has been inspired by Dragon Ball Z, and they should wear that badge with honor, you know? My personal hot takes that would get me cancelled by teenagers on Twitter aside, I do think that the new final boss and Supersonic 2 are a much better capstone to the game. Supreme's more beast-like animations add that extra bit of final boss intimidation. Sonic's brief transformation into Supersonic Cyber, also named by an in-game file, while fun to see for those few seconds in a cutscene, in another action game would have made a great Berserker mode for Supersonic 2 or even base Sonic. Honestly, I feel like that was something that was missing from Sonic's combat. A bar that you could build up and then use to do more damage, especially with some of these trials where you are reset back to 1. Sure, Phantom Rush is a thing, but that's not a cool Cyber Berserk mode, so, you know. Funnily enough, the Werehog did have the Unleashed mode during combat, so maybe they just didn't want to add it to this game with Phantom Rush sorta filling that role. Speaking of character kits, for the first time in almost 17 years, 15 years if you count the Werehog as a separate character, we get to play as not 1, not 2, but 3 whole-ass new additional characters in a Sonic game. And compared to their last appearances in 2006, yeah, they're alright. For 3 new additional playstyles added in give or take 11 months, I don't think I could ask for anything better. Don't get me wrong, all 3 could be better, but they could also be a lot worse. I mean, just look at 06. Amy Rose is the first of the new playable characters, and I'd argue this is her best playstyle in any game she's been in. I've heard some complaints that she goes too hard into her newly rediscovered passion for tarot readings, but honestly, I kinda like it. Listen, right, I like a big fuck-off hammer as much as the next guy, but her using more occult-esque stuff helps to set her apart from the other characters. Amy's kit is still pretty reminiscent of her in Sonic Adventure. Triple jumps, now with a hover that continues off her momentum, which is just so much fun to float around with. Amy's special max ring move is probably one of the more creative things I've seen done with Amy animation-wise. Her using her hammer as a broom and her tarot cards as a giant wheel to speed through the island is kind of really cute and really fun. But on the flip side, I do agree. In a game about combat, her hammer is really missing from her combos. None of the characters get as an expanded combat kit as Sonic, and it really shows. Amy uses her tarot cards for a majority of her moves both combat-wise and exploration-wise, only busting out her Pico Hammer for her quick side loop ability and her max ring boost. But I also don't think that Amy's future movesets should be either Pico Hammer or tarot cards. Honestly, hear me out in this little pitch I have to make Amy's descent into the occult more fun. In a certain RPG series from Japan that I will not name, there exists a class type called Mystic Knight. Mystic Knights use magic to enhance their weapons and give it various effects, ranging from basic damage to poisoning your enemies. Now, imagine the following scenario. Amy is surrounded by egg pawns when suddenly she slaps one of her tarot cards onto her Pico Hammer and boom, all of the egg pawns just disappear in a flash of fire. Outside of her new and fun movement options using the tarot cards, whatever combat revolves around using specific tarot cards for stuff like AoE attacks, damage over time effects, and all that good stuff. They're in fact already dabbling into status effects a tiny bit for all 3 of the additional characters, as in their full kit, each of their parries gives the enemy either a defense down, an attack down, or poison. Why have one or the other when you can just have both and make Amy into a powerhouse powered by a massive fuck-off hammer and the forces of Cthulhu? Hell, if you ever want to give her own proper super form, Mystic Amy, or something similar, is right there as a thing. Knuckles the Echidna, or most commonly known by his nickname on Angel Island, Knuckle, plays basically exactly how you'd expect him to play from his adventure incarnation onwards, but not as good. For one, Knuckles' gliding is much more nerfed compared to his Sonic Adventure kit. Turning in midair has this long curve instead of the more free 360 movement. There's also a weird pause before you actually glide, which is more of an annoyance than an issue, but I can look past it. Wall climbing makes a return, except instead of free climbing all around the island, you're confined to specific climbable walls, which kind of defeats the purpose and goes back to my earlier point of either giving the player the freedom to do what they want, or make them play by rigid rules, and not this weird two-way street. Climbing is a little, I guess, floaty? Some of Knuckles' challenges and puzzles tied to it are very much hit or miss because of how quickly Knuckles turns corners, accidentally throwing yourself into a laser or a bomb, or even off the wall if there's a regular wall next to it. An easy fix for this would be tying corner switching to the trigger buttons while you're on a wall, so that you can more easily move left and right without fear of making the world around you go 90 degrees. Knuckles' max ring moves let him glide faster and drill horizontally around on the ground. It's not a lot, but like the spin dash, it does speed up ground movement in case you need to get somewhere for higher ground and then gliding off of it. Tails is probably the weakest of the extra playable characters, and it's a little disappointing. I am a big fan of Tails' gameplay style of Sonic Adventure, and I think he might have peaked there. And while the game takes very obvious cues from this, Tails' moveset is focused on gadgets, not even having a homing attack, which is just insane considering everybody else does. I get what they're going for, separating him from just being a flying Sonic by having him use his gadgets and technical prowess, but again, in a game about fast-paced combat, throwing wrenches is not satisfying in the slightest. Tails' flying, much like Knuckles' gliding, is nerfed compared to earlier incarnations, but I think that happened for a reason. Tails' initial flying is basically just a hover. Tails launches himself up into the air, and then for a while, you're able to just hover around freely. Instead of like previous games, where you have free control over Tails' vertical ascent and descent, kind of defeating the point of making him the flying character. But the thing is, when you unlock Tails' max ring ability, taking cues from Sonic Adventure 2, Tails busts out the Cyclone, and you get free flying for as long as you have boost energy, which, you know, is infinite using the Psyloop. Much like Knuckles' gliding, it also has a weird long turning curve, but I gotta be honest, I don't mind with this, and it is a lot of fun to fly around the island using the Cyclone. A small issue I had that I brushed away with Base Frontiers was that Supersonic was tied exclusively to bosses, not even letting you use him in the open world after finishing the game to complete whatever challenges you had left, which is ironic considering before Frontiers dropped, I was pretty sick of Supersonic in 3D games because it didn't really feel special anymore. It was just Sonic with infinite boost, unable to be used in boss stages or even using any Wisp powers, and considering the short length of most stages, just wasn't worth it. Basically defeating the purpose of Supersonic in the 2D games as a reward and putting the game into easy mode when you collected 50 rings and unlocking a true ending. But the Cyclone basically scratches that itch. It's a shame that you can only use all 3 new characters on the specific Update 3 version of Lerno's Island, which is also where the next issue I have lies. All 3 characters get basic combat abilities, but I'm gonna be honest, I basically avoided any big enemies that couldn't be destroyed in one hit. Each character has all their stats start at 1 out of 99 with little to no abilities unlocked. It is not satisfying to fight any of the mid-bosses like ninjas because of the little combat kit you actually get. I was really looking forward to using Knuckles to fight some bosses, and thanks to his defense down parry ability, he is probably the best character to do combat with outside of Sonic on very specific bosses. During one of those funny meteor shower nights, instead of fishing coins, you now get upgrade materials, which is nice for upgrading characters to their max, but there is little to no point with how souped up the actual bosses are. Even with Sonic at max level and fully decked out, it's just not worth it to fight the bosses. Rather, you can just avoid them and get stage gears via the Psyloop and treasure spots around the island. 2 of the 3 characters get a homing attack, and all 3 get the spin dash, which, despite their extended kits having much better movement options in midair, only Tails can really get free movement in midair. So the spin dash is a much welcomed addition if you need to quickly ramp off stuff or reach a higher vantage point and glide from there, as I mentioned earlier. But man, why does Tails not get a homing attack? None of his character-specific challenges require it, sure, but man, it's a miss for quick traversal or even trying to jump on like pulleys and stuff. Especially when a homing attack could save you from falling in midair when you do run out of flying stamina as Tails. All 3 characters get specific platforming challenges across the island for EXP, map unlocking, and story progression. But outside of Amy, I kinda skipped a lot of them with Tails and Knuckles, which I think is the perfect way to do it. Like, yeah, I should be able to use the Cyclone to just skip to the end of a challenge if I go out of my way to unlock it. And some specific challenges have requirements that require you to do the whole thing no matter what, which I didn't really mind. I think what they've done in 11 months is admirable, but it's very obvious they needed more time to fine-tune the characters and get them just right. Kishimoto has already confirmed that they want to focus on more playable characters in the future, and this is a good baseline for whatever they cook up next. But it does need some additions and extra stuff added to make the characters feel more fleshed out and fun to do combat with. And honestly, that's kind of it really. I don't think we'll get any more extra content, except maybe some music drops or new skins if they're feeling generous. Sonic Frontiers as a first step into the 3rd generation of Sonic is a decent one. It sets the groundwork, and I for one have faith in current Sonic team that they can pull it off. We've seen what they can do now with all the experience gained from Frontiers, and even a year later, they're already more willing to go out of their comfort zone. As of writing this, it is the 11th of October, so we're about 6 days off from Sonic Superstars, and yeah, I'm probably gonna really like that unless something horrible happens. Like Dims was the true developer all along and it's just Sonic for Episode 3. But for once, I'm hopeful for the future of Sonic, which is something I'm really happy to be able to say. At the start of the video, I mentioned I wanted to take a look at Sonic Frontiers as a game, not as just a Sonic game. And even trying my best to write through that lens, I don't think my personal bias will ever really disappear. I've been with this franchise for 20 years now. I've seen the highs, I've seen the lows, and my view on Sonic games will sadly always be based on previous experiences. So, do I think Sonic Frontiers is a good game? Yeah, I do. It has quirks, it has its difficulty spikes, but ignoring the Sonic packaging, this is just a very mid to decent action game with obvious inspiration from DMC and other games in the same vein. And while I still think the cyber stages are the weakest part of the game, fixed with some mods here and there if you're a PC player, I think Sonic Frontiers is a fun game, and not just as a Sonic game, but a fun game in general. If somebody came up to me and asked me what my go-to first action game would be, I honestly don't think I would recommend Sonic Frontiers. There are other games, potentially not on the PC, that are much better introductions to the action game genre. But if you are just looking for a fun, easy time with some fun story, some cool ideas, and kind of a return to Sonic's like glory days, if you ask me, or even if you just want to get into Sonic games, I do think Sonic Frontiers is a great game to get into. Like I mentioned earlier, I am hopeful for the future of Sonic. I am hopeful for Sonic Team. On the off chance that Superstars isn't all that good, I do think that whenever Sonic Team announces their next Sonic game in like 4 to 5 to maybe even 6 years, I'll probably be excited to see what that entails. Unless, of course, it's once again going back to just the pure boost formula and we're stuck with another Forces. But for now, I think the future of Sonic looks pretty bright, and I genuinely can't wait to see where this third generation of Sonic goes. And hopefully, Kishimoto's like very ambitious ideas aren't stifled by shareholders and CEOs, because I genuinely think that the second installment in the third generation of Sonic has the chance and the opportunity to be one of the franchise's best. And I, for one, can't wait to see what the future holds.